your Chargers linebacker, Dan Henley, and you're tuning in with Chargers Unleashed.
Welcome to another edition of Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Dan Wolkenstein here with you from the LA Football Network. If this is your first time tuning into the show, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Dan Wolkenstein, it feels like it's been too long. It's really only been a week, but certain issues came up over the last couple of weeks. As you can see, Dan is not in his usual environment. Dan is actually currently in the Rockies in Denver waiting to come home. I am in a much different setup due to my recent developments in my own home. But Dan, no preview this week. It's a bye week for the Chargers, a much needed bye week, given their litany of injuries and certain things offensively that they need to go back to the drawing board and correct. And we're going to get into all that because a lot of questions as it currently stands right now with this team. What have we learned through the first couple of weeks? What needs improvement? How do they move forward? And of course, Dan and I always love the live shows. This is when we get the opportunity to talk to everybody. So get your questions into the chat. Dan and I will do our best over the next hour or so to go through all of them. But Dan Wolkenstein, sir, how are you?
I'm good. As good as I can be. It's been a rough week. Had some family stuff going on that hasn't been fun. Death is never good, but just tell your loved ones you love them when you can, while you still can. But I'm ready to get back to football, and so this is kind of a bit of therapy for me, and honestly, probably for a lot of people. I think this has been a good time to kind of take a pause for a second and get some perspective on this Chargers team and what they can do better, things that they have improved, what's changed, what's stayed the same, how this first quarter of the season for the Chargers looks, and maybe kind of setting the stage for the next quarter, the second quarter of the season. Jake, before we get to that and all the Q&As with, of course, folks in the chat, you know how to do this. If you have any questions, topics, thoughts, things you'd like to discuss, put them in the chat. We'll do our best to weave them through our discussion that we have kind of laid out for you. Before we get to any of that, Jake, though, talk about our friends.
You wanted to knock that one right out of the park very early, didn't you?
Yep.
You wanted to Fernando Tatis that thing right there. I got you. I follow. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. BetOnline is every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. You think you know your stuff? Get in on our 200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games against the spread every week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of $200K. When the game is over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker or unwind with one of our 150 slot games. Head on over to the website today to get in on the action. That's betonline.ag. BetOnline, the game starts here.
So I think it's good to start these. You mentioned Tatis, by the way. Chargers fans, this next couple of weeks is going to be a struggle with kind of the civil war, so to speak. Chargers fan over here, Chargers fan over there, Chargers fans out there everywhere. We're all in this together, but Padres fan. Go Pods, LFGSD. I'm hoping to see lots of wins in San Diego. So let's have some fun. Let's have some fun. Jake, what have we learned? First quarter of the season in the books. Tale of 2 games here, 2 games there, but there have been consistencies. But what have we learned so far about this team? Big picture.
Big picture. First 2 weeks really started off well because it went to the formula that Jim Harbaugh has been wanting to install since day one. The running game was working. You paced the game. You set the tone for the physicality that you wanted to do offensively. At least for 2.5 weeks, you take away that first week in the Raiders game where you really couldn't get much going, but for that second half, you absolutely dominated in terms of what it was that you wanted to do in that game. And then you look at Pittsburgh and you look at the Chiefs game. And in reality, I didn't actually think that the Chargers had a bad game plan going into the Chiefs game, the Pittsburgh game, because you relied a little bit more on Justin Herbert's arm before all the injuries started taking place. I thought Justin Herbert looked solid, even on the bad ankle. I thought he looked sharp. I thought he was delivering his passes very, very well. And the Chargers were able to score early, something that we didn't traditionally see from this team. They've been scoring on their first couple of drives over these last couple of games, which is good. But Dan, after the Chiefs game, injuries aside, because we've talked about that ad nauseum, we know what this Chargers team can do. Obviously, when you go from having your all-pro left tackle in Rashawn Slater and, a great rookie thus far in Joe Alt, and you substitute that for Jamari Sawyer, Trey Pipkins back at right tackle, and Mustafa at guard, you're going to have some struggles, whether it's in the passing game or the running game. And Dan, I kind of went back and I thought about this for a second, and I thought back to when Gus Bradley was the defensive coordinator of this team. And I can't remember if it was 2019, 2020, Derwin James was gone for the season. Gus Bradley, on how he ran his defense, everything ran through Derwin James that year. And when Derwin was lost, it seemed like Gus didn't know how to properly operate. Obviously, you can't replace a Derwin James in any facet of the rule, but Gus just was not able to recover with that. I thought of it similarly in these two circumstances over the last 2 weeks. Greg Roman, Jim Harbaugh with what they want to do and running the ball. When you don't have the horses up front to dictate the pace and open up holes for your running game, and when you can't get that facet going, especially when you can't protect the quarterback, there's not a lot that you can do. So I think going back and, everybody saying, and I agree with it in terms of the bye being at this point in time, yes, it's a godsend at this point in time. It's perfect timing, in my opinion, not only for the Chargers to obviously get healthy, get some of their horses back, but I think it's a reflection time for Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman in terms of what it is that they need to do moving forward offensively. How can they adapt moving forward? Because they got a tough stretch over these next 4 weeks. 3 of their next four games are on the road. And they need to obviously recover after losing 2 straight, coming back off of this injury bug, and they need to know how they're going to operate. And more importantly, like Jim Harbaugh said, being able to score in the later part of the game so that they can ultimately get out of there with a win.
Yeah, it's it's kind of interesting. And I feel like, Chargers fans were not used to this, because remember, Jake, going into the season, we talked about, like, could we just have an average defense? We just have an average defense, and this Chargers team will cook with Jim Harbaugh and with Justin Herbert and company. And then you snap the line after 4 weeks, first quarter, you start looking at this defense, right? Average, throw that out the window. Opponent rushing yards per game, they are 5th best in the NFL. Opposing passing yards per game, this Chargers team is ranked 13th best in the NFL. 13th, you would take that every second of the day. Opponent passer rating. Remember how atrocious this Chargers team was against the pass last year? Currently, Jake, 14th. 14th lowest passer rating allowed to NFL team. Now, some of that is because of the quarterbacks they've gone up against. But what have we talked about, Jake? How many times have we said whenever the Chargers go up against a horrible quarterback to make him look like a Heisman Trophy winner?
Take these stats and put them up against the first quarter of last year and see how that compares. It's night and day.
So big picture, right? I think we can be excited about this Chargers team from a coaching perspective, kind of going in the right direction, in my opinion. I think Jesse Minter has this defense humming, and he deserves all of the flowers. Jim Harbaugh, you see the culture laid out there. You see kind of the physicality. You see the toughness, all of that jazz. Joe Hortiz, take a bow. The first quarter of the season has looked so different in terms of roster construction, moving things around, bringing players in, types of players being brought in, all of that stuff, right? There's a lot of big 500-foot view things that everyone, I think, should be very, very happy about. And so I think the one anomaly here is the guy second to the right. Partially. You look at the run game the first 2 weeks, it was absolutely incredible. And everybody is on a high horse. Last 2 weeks, for different reasons, it was absolutely atrocious. And then look at other issues with injuries and then protecting Justin Herbert and the passing game is non-existent, all that kind of stuff. That all, I think, has kind of put a little bit of a black eye on Greg Roman, honestly, which we'll get to. But overall, I think this Chargers team, if you get 3 out of 4 of these things cooking, right? And one of them might be kind of an incomplete right now with Greg Roman. I think overall that's pretty good. Maybe the next question for Chargers fans, and maybe I'll go through some of these in the chat, Jake. When we ask the question of things that I think people would like to see or the biggest issues, Jake. This team needs to stop the self-inflicted penalties on offense. I'll let you take that one first.
Yeah, I mean, you go back to the Pittsburgh game. It was undisciplined defense, ones that just really got you in bad positions. Obviously, we talked about that a lot in the recap after the Steelers game. Say what you want about the Derwin James suspension and that being a penalty. Even Pat Freiermuth said that wasn't a dirty play. And, we could talk about that for an entire episode if we wanted to. But outside of that, there were plenty of more undisciplined penalties on the defense in that game that kept Steelers drives going. Now, the KC game, I thought they were much more in tune. It was much better football from the defense, and it was the offensive side of the ball. But when you have 3/5 of your offensive line that are basically makeshift within a week's period of time, those kind of things are to be expected. So, yeah, self-inflicted penalties for a lot of different reasons over the last 2 weeks on both sides of the ball. And that's a big aspect that they need to clean up, because especially when you're in a situation like the Chargers are with Justin Herbert being injured, you don't have your right or your left tackle. And when you start getting yourself into situations when you're in 3rd and long behind the sticks, defenses know exactly how to put you away and just absolutely kill those drives. And especially if you're going up a defensive coordinator, the likes of Spagnuolo, he has no fear in what he is going to do. He is going to pin his ears back and he is going to come after you, and he is going to shut that drive down immediately. So yes, it's a big aspect of what they need to do moving forward. They need to clean up their game.
3rd most false starts in the NFL, Jake. Your Los Angeles Chargers. 3rd most. They have 8 false starts already. And you can't have that with a run-heavy team. You can't get behind the sticks. You saw it specifically against the Chiefs all game. You saw how many – you and I were talking offline, Jake, how many 3rd and longs there were in that game. It's just impossible for this team to be able to overcome those. You saw that against the Steelers as well. But other side of the coin, the disappointment there was the penalties and boneheaded mistake you saw on the defense. And so it was like, all right, game 3, defensive penalties and inopportune times, screwed them. Game 4, inopportune penalties. But you kind of saw those penalties show up a bit against the Raiders in week 1 as well. Remember that first half? It was awful. And so there's some trends there. So that biggest disappointment thing and things that we would have thought would have been fixed, the self-inflicted mistakes that JT the Nut was kind of talking about, or J Nut 23 was talking about, 100%. That's the reason why that they are now 2-2. Without those self-inflicted wounds and those penalties, they're 4-0. Honestly, they could very well should be at least 3-1, and that is kind of, I put that a bit on the coaching. That's a coaching issue. You can't have pre-snap penalties. You can't have these lapses in judgment and execution. Like, that's a coaching thing. And so, not flawless, but yeah, that's definitely a biggest disappointment for me. What's next? What else you got?
I mean, disappointment just in terms of like execution, Dan. I think you go back to that Pittsburgh game and you felt that the way that the game was going with Justin Herbert, that was going to be a game that you were going to have to rely more on his arm in that game. And then, of course, injuries just absolutely derailed everything. I think when you go back to the Kansas City game and you look at things hindsight 2020, when you look at that final score, holding the Chiefs to 17 points in any fashion should be a game that you should be able to win. And even still, with all of the injuries that the Chargers had going into that game and what they ended up putting out there, you still felt, as much as they put a good drive together for the first one that they had after the turnover, and of course, Ladd McConkey getting into the end zone, I felt that execution was great. You were finding ways to get Ladd in space. You were finding ways to get Quinn Johnson in space. I thought that the plan that they had early with the screen passes that they really had not executed much in the first couple of weeks, I thought was great, because you knew that the pass rush was going to be coming at you with a makeshift offensive line. And then, again, you have to understand that Spagnuolo is just so good at adapting to game plans. I felt that Greg Roman didn't quite adapt to what was happening enough in that circumstance. And the Chargers were just in quicksand, and they just could not get themselves out of that hole for really the last 3 quarters of the game. And it was just unfortunate when you saw the final score and you're like, even still, even against all odds, that game was still there to be more competitive, regardless of what the final score says. Unfortunately, it just didn't tell the entire story of how bad the Chargers offensive, as far as how bad the Chargers offense looked after that first drive.
Yeah. A couple of things in here that I thought I wanted to kind of push back a little bit respectfully. There's a couple things about our running game not being good against good teams. And Matt Dahl says run game is no bueno. I kind of push back a little bit. It is hard to have an efficient running game when you are playing 3rd and 20, 3rd and 15, 2nd and 13. Like, it's hard to win. That's not how this team is built. And, you know, I put that on a little bit on Greg Roman afterwards instead of immediately trying to kind of start taking shots with Justin Herbert. And I know, again, Justin Herbert's been hurt. I don't think it's that the running game isn't good against good teams. It's that they have put themselves behind the 8 ball in both of the games against good teams, and therefore screwed themselves out of the opportunity to actually be in run advantage situations. What are you going to do when it's 3rd and 15? Are you going to run it, or are you going to try to do something? But then when you don't have offensive tackles there to help block, you're going to get blown up. And so recipe for disaster. But I don't think it's the running game is not good. Robert asks, Jake, is it just me, or am I the only one who thinks Greg Roman isn't the right offensive coordinator for a pocket presence quarterback? I get that he wants to run the ball, but Herbert seems to be trapped and doesn't seem to be himself. A lot there.
Yes.
Is Justin Herbert a pocket presence quarterback? I don't think he is. He could be, but I don't think he would like to be. I mean, that's kind of the whole point.
Well, also,
ankle sprains don't help.
He can't move around how he normally would to escape pressure because of that ankle. Even in the situations where he could against Kansas City, I mean, granted, it's still amazing the fact that he moved around, avoided pressure from Chris Jones, and threw that ball to J.K. Dobbins along the sidelines, which should have been caught. It's really amazing the fact of where he put that throw, given the circumstances. But yes, as far as like in terms of seeing Justin as himself and seeing him utilize his legs more, you know, the first 2 weeks he didn't have to. Other guys were using their legs, and that was working. You didn't have to have Justin Herbert doing that. The last couple of weeks, you faced some really good defensive line play and what Pittsburgh has along their defensive line and what KC has along their defensive line. And when you have Justin Herbert that has a sprained ankle and can't move around the way that he can, yeah, it's going to look a little bit different. So you hope that after a couple of weeks of rest, that ankle feels better and that he can move around a little bit better on it. And that if the situation calls for it, for him to, you know, do some of those rollouts and make some of those passes along the sidelines, or, you know, come up the middle and go up for another 5 to 10 yards rushing himself, he can do that.
Young West making me blush over here. Young West with a $5 donation. Thank you so much. Dan, looking 22 years old. What's the secret? LOL. Probably because don't have to stress because we are on a bye week. LOL. What's your ideal record next 4 games? Okay, first half, I certainly do not feel 22. I didn't think I looked 22, but I will take it. It's been a tough week. No question about it. And it's definitely added some gray hairs, which that's exciting. The second part of that, Jake, ideal record next 4 games, 3-1. That's my, I mean, ideally, obviously 4-0, but 3-1 is what I expect, which we'll get to that. They have winnable games against teams that they should beat. Yeah, I think the part of this team that we haven't seen in years past is Chargers teams beating teams that they should beat and then making it competitive against teams that they are maybe not as good as. So far, they beat the team they should, and they have lost the teams that have been up to or better than them. So, yeah, that answers that. Let's see. Any questions here? James says we could be 0-4. We could be, I guess. But I don't think it's that. Like, this team has played pretty well, and this team has played far better and more complete than they have in years past. And we can say, like, in years past, oh, this team could have easily lost those games too, like, kind of, but the way they won those games, first off, they could not be 0-4. They definitely would at least have won. There's no way they're losing that Carolina game. And then yeah, so I don't know. That's a little too far. I think that's probably emotions getting to the best of them. But Jake, I think this is the part that has most Chargers fans, I think, excited and optimistic a bit. Is you gotta think that Justin's gonna figure this out, and Greg Roman's gonna figure this out. But if if the defense is looking like this early, with all of the new moving parts and all of the new, and they're doing this without Derby, without Joey, without a lot of pieces, and a bunch of new pieces, that's special. And I said it 8 months ago, feeling like Jesse Minter is the truth.
You know, we talk about all the players offensively that the Chargers didn't have in that Chiefs game. You go back and look at the players that did not play last Sunday on defense and look at the performance that they still put up against the Chiefs in that game. Look at how creative Jesse Minter was to create pressure. The fact that you didn't have Derwin James or Joey Bosa in that game. Look at where he was bringing pressure. Look where he was bringing the blitzes. When you have Travis Kelce going on a podcast and lauding the opposing team's defensive coordinator, you know something's good. Remember how Travis Kelce had talked about Brandon Staley in the past? Travis Kelce hoped that Brandon Staley would never leave the Chargers, given how the fact that the Kansas City Chiefs have performed against them for the past several years. There is something to be said about what Jesse Minter has done defensively with this team and with this unit and how he has transformed it with this new talent in just a single season. It really is a testament to him.
James Wagner says, Harbaugh admitted and owned the coaching error regarding the penalty issues. Frankly, this is refreshing, 100%. And I think that credibility and accountability is huge. And there's something to be said about a coach who owns it, and a coach like that who owns it, right? Like, it's genuine. And we all talked about the Josh Palmer fiasco of him going down weirdly, and then him not challenging it and calling timeout anyways, which that was a mistake. That was a Jim Harbaugh mistake that should have not been done. Made a mistake, he owned it, and I think the penalties, I've said it from the beginning, that's an execution issue, which is a coaching thing. Jim Harbaugh agrees. So James, good point. You have faith that Jim Harbaugh can clean that up. Like, these are fixable issues. I think that's what makes these past 2 weeks, especially for me, Jake, and probably more so for me than for you, makes these past 2 weeks, especially this past one, so frustrating. Because I thought that this team was going to have its bumps. I thought there's no way they're going to fix this in one season. But I didn't think that they were going to lose because of the reasons they've lost the last 2 games, which are self-inflicted mistakes. We can talk about the injuries, but once the game started and once the plays were happening, they weren't losing because of injuries. They just weren't. They were losing because they were killing themselves over and over and over again, and they could not adapt. And in critical situations, the other teams made winning plays, and they didn't. That's it. Even with Joe Alt out, even with Joey Bosa out, even with Rashawn Slater out, in a game against the Steelers, that defense had so many opportunities to get off the field, and they kept shooting themselves in the foot, giving them the Justin Fields pass to Calvin Austin. Game over. The Chiefs game, you get them to score 10 points for how long? You can't blame the defense on that, and your offense can't do anything. 3 of those points were because of the defense anyways. You did nothing. And you went backwards like 20 yards on that when they got a field goal. So that's the frustrating part. Is it's not that they lost to the Chiefs. It's how they lost to the Chiefs. And you could say, sure, the Chargers coaching staff got these guys up to play, and they look pretty good. When you're up 10-0 with Justin Herbert and you score nothing the rest of the game, that's an issue. And we'll get to some of the other issues here later in a bit. I got some numbers here that blow your mind, but that's, I think, what was most gut-wrenching to me, and I was in my feelings. I kind of still am. I'm almost over it, Jake. But folks who have been around the block with us for a bit, Jake has been the pessimist. I have been the optimist, and something happened. And now every time Jake and I are on the phone, he's talking me off the ledge, and I am giving him no excuses.
Dan Wolkenstein is ready to start his villain arc last week. After that game on Sunday, Dan Wolkenstein was in in a boisterous type of state that I had never heard him in before. I was ready to give him the old Harvey Dent line. You either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. Dan Wolkenstein is definitely headed that direction right now.
So let's talk about guilty as charged came in. Herbert is one of the 3 best pocket presence quarterbacks in the league. Definitely wants to stay in there. I get he's epic at that, but I think in a Greg Roman offense, I think that they would like to kind of extend this and move the pocket a bit and get him using his legs. Unfortunately, he can't right now with a high ankle sprain and kind of the concepts that they're building. And yes, he is elite in the pocket, but he's also elite on the run. He's also elite in play action. So, like, just because he's great at being a pocket presence quarterback doesn't mean that he wants to be a pocket presence quarterback all the time. I think it's just what he's good at, which is almost everything. What would you say are the other improvements that need to be required that you maybe specifically that you thought were going to be fixed that aren't?
I thought that were going to be fixed but aren't. I
can tell you right now. Look at a freaking picture.
Well, yes, and I mean it's. I think this is a tale of 2 weeks to a different 2 weeks, though, Dan. Your entire argument is going to collapse on itself when you take out Rashawn Slater and Joe Alt. And in accordance to everything, whether it's protection of Justin Herbert or it's this run game, as I was saying at the beginning of the show, everything revolves around this offensive line. That is what Jim Harbaugh needs to succeed. And we could have said that about Brandon Staley's teams, about Anthony Lynn's teams, and sure, those were some bad offensive lines that Justin Herbert was behind. But when you try to create a makeshift offensive line with Jamari Sawyer shifting over to left guard, with Trey Pipkins going over to left tackle, when you have Trey Pipkins going back to right tackle, that we have seen that not be so successful in the past. And when you bring up a practice squad, Sam Mustipher, and try to insert him in at right guard next to Bradley Bozeman, who thus far over the first few weeks has not been playing that well, I would have to say I'm not really sure why anybody would be surprised by it. I mean, let's admit there was a reason why the narrative was out there that Justin Herbert shouldn't have been playing in that Kansas City game. And it was because the offensive line was so beat up, and you knew what Steve Spagnuolo and that team was going to do. Thankfully, Justin Herbert didn't get injured any further.
God. But that was the most pressures he's had in a quarterback, like as a quarterback. Was it most?
But in the big picture of things, I mean, was anybody really surprised of that outcome?
Yes.
I think that is more in line for the fact of why you were disappointed, because even with all those things, you were still in that game. But in terms of how this team was shut down and how badly that offensive line did, look, did we expect it to be perfect? Absolutely not. Maybe some people were on the other side of the spectrum where like, I expected it to be bad, but I didn't expect it to look that bad. And I totally get every side of that argument.
But here's the thing for me, though. Guilty as charged said they were 9th in the league in rushing success rate in the first 2 games and then last 2 games.
Yeah.
Obviously, Alt and Slater, I know that. I'm not saying it doesn't change things, make it harder. I'm saying those were not the reasons, in my opinion, that they actually lost those games once the play started. They had to win differently, and they could have won different.
I think this was more in line with what people were saying in terms of the running game being bad, where this question came from. Or where the comment from guilty as charged came from. But yes, this is absolutely true. Again, offensive line does everything. And so, especially when you take your 2 best ones out, look, I mean, we would hope that from what we were told and what we were seeing during training camp, that in terms of like, hey, if there's an injury, regardless of where the position is at, the drop-off is not going to be that bad in terms of performance. However, last week against the defending Super Bowl champs, it was. Would it have looked this bad if you were going up against Carolina or Jacksonville? Probably not. But you're going up against a multiple Super Bowl defensive coordinator in Steve Spagnuolo, Andy Reid, who have been together like this for several years, who know how to beat this team. And especially if it means a makeshift offensive line, they're going to know exactly how to bring pressure. So I get it from the standpoint of why people are disappointed, and you're still in a 1-score game given all the elements. But at the same time, there was a reason why that narrative was out there about why Justin Herbert should not play. Again, in hindsight's 2020, thankfully for him, there was no further injury to him. But the running game couldn't get going, and your offense was seemingly shut down and put in third and long situations for the next 3 quarters because you were playing a much better defense.
So here was where I was going to take this, and James Wagner is, I think, touching on what I was going to say, where he says tip of the spear. The interior offensive line needs so much work because as much as we want to say, okay, the tackles, they might not look obviously as good when they don't have Alt or Slater. You still got your tight ends that could chip, and they have tight ends that can do that. Like, they can kind of help there. But you saw it against the Raiders, even when they had Alt and Slater out there. Where'd they go? They absolutely bull rushed the interior. You saw it against the Steelers, same thing. You saw it against the Chiefs, same thing. And it's kind of twofold because on one side, you wish that they were playing better, right? You wish that Bozeman was playing better. You wish that Zion Johnson was playing better. You wish that Sam Mustipher, whatever, which we'll get to that. But on top of that, it's that the game plan hasn't been adjusted to account for that. And, we haven't seen that adjustment, I think, that we've seen from the defensive side from Greg Roman. And so that's frustrating because we saw that last year. How many times you saw pressure get to this team and completely diminish any chance of this team coming back because the opposing team know it's coming. They're just going to say, screw it, we're not going to let you do it. What did you make of the Sam Mustipher? Are you okay with that? Like, not now, obviously, but the decision to do it. Like, when it happened, I think both of us were kind of like, what?
Look, I was saying leading up to the game, and this was just my prediction of what I thought that the offensive line was going to be at that period of time. I thought that they would go with Foster Sorrell at left tackle. You would bring in Jamari Sawyer to insert at right guard, and then you'd kick Trey Pipkins out to right tackle. That's what I thought personally it was going to be. There was a lot of praise for Foster Sorrell throughout the preseason. And based off that, that is what I made my assumption on. And as much as we like to talk about, and it is warranted for what Jamari Sawyer was able to do when Rashawn Slater went out, what he was able to do at left tackle during that year was great. But I think we can all agree that he is built more to have success in the interior. And I really thought that that's what they were going to do. I don't know what went into that situation. Again, we're not in the locker room. We don't know the team as well as Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman do. So that was their decision on how they wanted to make the best 5. So be it. I personally would have gone in a different direction if it was me. That's it.
Robert says, we will face another good defense in Denver next week. If we still cannot run the ball, my point shows up even more. Honestly, Robert, I'm with you. I've heard so many Chargers fans and people on social media and folks talk about, but they went up against a really good Raiders front, right? Oh, they went up against a really good defensive end in Jadeveon Clowney against the Panthers. Oh, they went up against a great Steelers defense. Oh, they went up a great Chiefs defense. All true. But at some point, you got to punch back, and you got Justin Herbert. Like, you should be able to stand up to that challenge. And you always hear the phrase, good offense beats good defense. The perfect offense will beat the perfect defense because the offense has the advantage. Don't tell that to Jesse Minter, but that's typically how it goes. That's where you see some of these games that end up being like 42-39, and they're 2 great defenses because opposing offenses are just better if it's done well. It's an excuse to me. Yes, you're going up against a good defense. Who cares? You should be able to put up more than what they're doing from a points-wise perspective. And that's what frustrates me is they cannot finish. Jake, they are dead last in the NFL in points per game in the third quarter. Dead last. Behind, actually tied with the New York Giants and Denver Broncos. New York Giants and the Chargers are tied at 1.5 points per game in the third quarter. Denver is 1.8.
I'm going back to those nightmares that we had from last season of not being able to score in the third quarter. Now, granted, I trust this coaching staff to correct those problems much more than the previous regime that was in here.
And ranked 24th in fourth quarter points per game. So second half, they aren't doing much. And the only reason why they even have that many is because they have the one touchdown with the Panthers. If that Panthers game wasn't there, man, this would look worse. Third fewest second half points per game in the NFL. And that's because of a Daniel Jones Giants team on offense and then a Tua less Miami team. Otherwise, they are worse than the New England Patriots, the Jaguars, the Broncos, the Browns. They're worse than Carolina, Jake, in second half points per game.
I fully understand now what it was like for you to have to listen to me for so many years bitching about all this stuff. The points and stats that you just brought up are completely valid. I get it. I really do. There is something about Jim Harbaugh, though, Dan, that gives you the utmost confidence. If it can turn a pessimist like me into looking at the bright side, and granted, I was going to
turn an optimist into someone like you.
Hang on a second. Hang on a second. All right.
You made me turn into you.
I know. I don't know what the hell happened. Okay. I don't know what has flip-flopped the personalities on this podcast. But Dan, there is something there's a reason why everybody was hyped to the rafters about Jim Harbaugh.
Of course,
he arrived here.
Yes, and that doesn't change. I'm still like, again, I'm going to vacuum in these 2 weeks.
Did anybody actually expect this team to go undefeated throughout the entirety of this season? No. Hell, I even said it during the preseason, Dan, as we were getting close to week 1. I said there will be some times where this team is going to falter. They're going to step on their own toes. They're going to shoot themselves in the foot. But the difference being is they are going to find a way to correct it. There is no way. Hell, you even take the defensive performance of the Pittsburgh to the Kansas City game. Immediately, Dan, much more disciplined. They tightened up the screws. You take a much bigger sample size of 3 years in the previous regime. I mean, I was begging for adaptation. I was begging for correction on a week-to-week basis. Give me something. And I didn't see that. I have much more trust in this coaching staff, whether it's Greg Roman's system and what he wants to run. Again, I go back to the Steelers game. I actually thought that the plan that they had for that first half and Justin Herbert using his arm was a great plan. I really did. They didn't have to rely on the run as much, but they were getting their opportunities in the pass game. Quentin Johnston was making plays. You were attacking them over the middle, and you were finding some holes. Again, is it a really good defense? Yes, it is. Was Kansas City a very good defense? Yes, and the elements were also a lot different from one week to the next.
To the Chiefs, and he gave up 17 points. Like that is so that.
Like that's more of a testament. That just shows you how bad of shape your offense was in. It's a testament to your defense, and it's a completely different side of coin with your offense. Now you have this bye week to get them healthy, to retool, to take a look in the mirror. I guarantee you that, yes, Denver should not be overlooked. If you want to overlook them in terms of Bo Nix and what they were able to do offensively, be my guest. But definitely do not do it defensively. Do not do it defensively.
It's completely flipped from last year. Last year, it was, I'm not worried about the offense mostly, and it was the defense that we're concerned about. And now it's just, Robert says passing game is what I'm saying. Roman just wants to run all the time, even if it's not working. That's not true. Like, that's not true. The Chargers are balanced. I think they're the most balanced team in the entire NFL. I think they have right around 50%. The issue is they need to be able to be successful at running to be a successful offense, and they can't do that when they are behind the sticks. That's been the issue. It's not that he's only running. That's not the case. It's just they can't be an effective running team when they are 3rd and 15 or more. It's just not going to happen. Brian, friend of the show, Jake, offense is very vanilla at times. Run, pass. You need to spread it out and get Justin Cook every once in a while, says every Chargers fan this season. Yes, we would like to see Justin Cook and like to see him throw more, spread it out, and make it harder for defenses. 100%. At times.
Reminds you of Marty Ball, doesn't it? But do we also remember who the offensive line was on that Marty Ball-led Hall of Fame year for LaDainian Tomlinson? Because I do, and it wasn't anywhere near what the Chargers currently have with their offensive line right now.
Yep. Yeah. Oh, look at LOD with the stats. He says we ran 24 times and passed 27 against the Chiefs. Again, like it's situational. That is what's making this thing bad. And Caleb brings up an interesting point, Jake, and you tell me what you think about this. It's not a bad system, he says. I think right now it's player dependent. Once it gets more involved and repped, it will become more effective for everyone.
Yes.
I think he's referring to DJ Chark. But even that, I don't know, because Ladd is not slow. Ladd could take the top off. So like why they're not doing that, I don't know.
Well, I mean, again, DJ Chark is going to be your deep threat wide receiver.
Right, but if he's not there, they still have Darius Davis and they have Ladd McConkey. Both can run freaking fast.
Sure, Dan. And I feel like in situational football, they have figured out ways to get him involved.
No, but I'm not saying involved. I'm saying like some people talk about how they can't extend the defense by putting guys and have them going far.
Right, but for what the offense,
DJ Chark's going to change it.
Sure, but also let's not forget, as much as we want to talk about the defensive lines of Pittsburgh and Kansas City, there's also some impressive secondary that both of those units boast as well. So what do you do in a situation where your offensive line can't protect? You can't have Justin Herbert going back there in 5 and 7 step drops and wait for Ladd McConkey to get down the field. You need to get him in a situation where he's going to win 90% of the time. And that's in short yardage situations. That's gaining separation. And you progressively move down the field. That's where Ladd can win in those type of situations. If Justin Herbert had the offensive line from 2006, by all means, do it. By all means, go deep with Ladd McConkey. That's fine. But you can't do that against defenses like that when you can't max protect against your quarterback.
Yeah, Robert says, is he not running on first and second downs and bringing up third and longs? No, go back and watch. Jake, I was fuming going through the play-by-play of that game against the Chiefs and how many of those series were crippled by third and 15s that started because of penalties, false starts, holdings, illegal formations, whatever it is. They too many of them. That was far more of an issue than them running for 1 or 2 yards or negative 1 yards. There's a question here, Jake, before I want to get to some positives here. Obviously, I want to get to some improvements and things that have been good.
I don't think I've ever seen you on a podcast go 45 minutes with negativity. I don't think I've ever heard you go 45 seconds of negativity.
Feel gross.
This is truly insane.
What are your thoughts on Gus Edwards?
I'll tell you this. I think Gus Edwards should have been used in that 4th and 1 scenario on the goal line late in the game against Kansas City. I'm going to pause. I'm not going to go back. That's what you brought him in for. We could talk about that play until we're blue in the face, because I think that is one that unanimously that people would agree with. You go back and you look at that in terms of just pre-snap formation on a 4th and 1 call. You're not even trying to let the defense know that it's going to be something else other than a pass. You went empty formation. And look what took place. I thought this is what you brought Gus Edwards in for, were to get these.
If there was one play to do that, that was the play.
So I think that Gus is I think that Gus is a very nice compliment to what J.K. Dobbins brings to the table. Look, we've seen him. You go back to that Panthers game, the way that Gus was running. I know that everybody focuses on J.K. Dobbins for what he did in those first 2 weeks. Go back to that Carolina game. Gus was running hard. Yeah. So, again, much like coaches adapting, you're going to get this going. You know that the focus is still going to be the run game. I would like to get in a situation where it's not just JK and it's not just Gus. I'd like you to insert a little bit more of
there's a guy you drafted
with Kamani Vidal back there to give a little bit more of an element to a run game. I would like to see an ability, because he's definitely able to catch the ball. There was one thing that I felt like was absent, Dan, that we haven't seen because of the likes of what Austin Eckler could do in the passing game, that you haven't seen with this running back stable. You really haven't seen many running back screens thus far through the first 4 weeks. They tried doing that idea
Which
with
I
the
thought
tight
you would
ends.
see more. You heard JK allude to that.
You tried doing that a little bit more in the Kansas City game with the tight ends and a couple other elements. But again, I think you need to add a new wrinkle to this running game in order to keep defenses honest. Obviously, the offensive line is going to have a lot to do with that when it returns back to full strength. But in terms of what is it that you can learn over these last 2 weeks, what's the new wrinkle that you can add to your offensive game plan, whether it's from players returning, inserting certain players that weren't there before, and overall a better scheme that's going to help you protect your quarterback, score points, and win games. I think you can do that.
Jay Walt says, this team was drafting the top 5 just a few months ago. If you're pissed that they lost to the defending Super Bowl champs, the Steelers, you probably had unrealistic expectations to begin with. I said it. They probably weren't on the show when I said it. It's not that they lost. It's how they lost. Because I don't remember, but our prediction episode, I think I had them losing those. So I'm not surprised at the result. I'm talking about in-game when everything was happening. It's the manner in which they lost that was frustrating. Jay Walt says, Ladd is not a deep threat. Everyone is condensed right now. Ladd should be a deep threat is what I'm saying. He hasn't been, but he should be. There's another question here about all 22. Have you watched the all 22? I don't know if our receivers can't get any separation or if Herbert can just get pressured too fast. It's more the latter.
Yes, it's more of that.
It's more the latter.
Ladd McConkey can definitely get separation. Yes.
Ladd is separating every time. It's that he cannot have enough time to get to these guys. And also, if we're being critical, Justin's missed a couple guys that were open and just didn't rip it. He could have. That said, I do think DJ Chark coming back will be a huge relief for this team, and I hope it comes soon. Okay, now let's get to some of the, I think, exciting things, Jake, and things I think Chargers fans should.
47 minutes in, and Dan Wolkenstein is finally saying the word excitement. Unbelievable.
Yeah, we had a couple euphoric moments in this show so far.
Are you kidding me? I had to listen to you for 3.5 years talk about stuff like this. I am going to eat this moment up.
Biggest improvements, biggest positives. I mean, I think the guy front and center on the right-hand side here, I think you can say is arguably the biggest improvement, at least on offense. Quinn has looked much improved. Again, small sample size, but you saw a lot of people talk about it during the training camp, during the offseason, and now he's kind of putting it together, and the production shows. Quinn Johnson's one. But there are so many guys who have improved in some of these prove-it moments, right? Like you've got Christian Fulton, aside from the one play against the fastest guy in the NFL, Christian Fulton has been absolutely fantastic and has been their bona fide CB1. Asante Samuel Jr., it's like a tale of two halves because there are the most inopportune missed tackles. But other than those missed tackles, he has been absolutely fantastic. You're looking at guys like Denzel Pearman. You're looking at Deion Henley. You're looking at a bunch of dudes. Derwin's looked a lot better this year. Trey Pipkins at guard, that's been great. That's been great. You're looking at, I think not that Rashawn Slater was bad last year, but he was going through injuries, so he wasn't his self, but he was still pretty darn good. He's looked really, really all-pro good. So, there's a ton of improvements. The linebacking core, Jake, all of them. Who are these people? The defense as a whole has been fantastic. So, I think that's what we said, Rome doesn't get built in a day, obviously. This isn't going to get fixed overnight. But there have been so many bright spots on this team. And I think what's most important is that it has been like a collective effort. It's not just on the shoulders of Justin Herbert. It's been the complete opposite. It's been without Justin Herbert. This is arguably the lowest Justin Herbert has completed production-wise in his career. And they have lost more games than this. Other than the multitude of guys I said, Jay, what were some of the biggest improvements, either macro or micro, that you've seen so far?
That's the Wolkenstein I remember. There we go. Defensively, Dan, I mean, you hit it on the head. It's incredible what Jesse Minter has been able to do with this unit, even through the first 4 weeks of the season. And look at how much better it's looked compared to a bigger standpoint of 3 years under the previous regime. You never saw it looking like this. Take the teams away. Strip those teams away, and you never saw stats like this through a 4-week period with this defense. It's absolutely incredible. Christian Fulton, I think, is turning out to be a great signing for them. You can obviously see that Steve Clinkscale and a new environment for him has definitely helped him out. You mentioned Deion Henley getting his opportunity to start. I think that Poona Ford and Tart have been big additions up in the middle.
Interior defensive line have been amazing.
Yes. Bud Dupree has been able to show up on a few occasions, especially over the last couple of weeks. Dan, you didn't have Jasir Taylor in that game against Kansas City, but that didn't matter. Don't tell Tarheeb Still that.
Yep.
This is what you're able to get out of this defense. It's almost like just an I don't give a shit type of mentality that they have back there, and they're winning a lot of the times when it comes to it. Regardless of what the final score says, their performance is really dictating the pace. If you went back and you look at the
fifth best rushing defense, this Chargers team right now.
Dan, they've only given the highest total that they have given up through the first 4 weeks has been 20 points. Go back and look at the first 4 weeks of last season and tell me what the scores were in that particular game. We've all talked about how much the record sways when Justin Herbert's defense allows a certain amount of points and what his record is then as opposed to what it is on the other side of the football. This defense can keep you in games and can make games winnable, of course, when your offense is operating the way that it should. So defensively, I have nothing but the best things to say. Do you need to clean some things up as it relates to, undisciplined penalties? Sure, those things are easily correctable. But in terms of how they're playing as a unit, you can't say enough of good things about it. Offensively, yes. When the offensive line is at full strength, this team is going to be able to operate better. Dan, I think over the next few weeks, you're going to see this offense open up a little bit more. Why do I think that the questions kind of come into play with it? Yes, DJ Chark is going to be an aspect of that. I also think, let's not forget, in a single season in terms of this wide receiver group, building rapport, building trust, you went away from Keenan Allen, you went away from Mike Williams. With the exception of Quentin Johnson, Darius Davis, and Josh Palmer, this is a whole new receiving unit. And you already see how much Ladd is being inserted into that. So I'm sure that they have a game plan for what they want to install when they have their full disposal of wide receivers. On top of that, J.K. Dobbins, first 2 weeks has looked great. Last 2 weeks hasn't. Why? It's not for him. It's because there are no holes opening up for that run game. I know that is going to change because that is the heartbeat of what makes this Jim Harbaugh offense run. But on top of that, if you're getting in yourself to situational football and it's short yardage situations and you don't want to risk hurting your quarterback's ankle, then put the big guy back there that you went out and got. If it's a goal to go situation and it's a 3rd and goal or 4th and goal play and you're on the 2-yard line, put the big guy back there. On top of that, give me some Kamani Vidal. I've been itching to see this guy in regular season games because we talked about it ad nauseum throughout the preseason, Dan, of what this running game was going to look like, not just from the standpoint of how often they were going to run the football, but you had 3 different guys that brought different elements to the game that could keep a defense on their heels. So I would hope from a personnel standpoint, you go back, you look at that, and maybe you start making Mr. Vidal active on game days.
Yeah. Matt Waters, $5 donation. Thank you. 6 quarters ago, we put 4 donut stairs on our NASCAR, tied our drivers' feet together, and we were upset and lost the race. It'll be okay, Dan.
Yes.
No, I know. Again, it wasn't that they lost the game. It was how they lost. That was frustrating. Jake, how about this? Chargers are tied for the 2nd best turnover margin per game in the NFL.
I mean, what the hell?
There's a lot of things that they can clean up, but there's a lot of things that they have done really well. And the defense has been as expected. And I would almost even say it's better than expected. We hope for an average defense, and it's better. It is much better than average defense. LOD says, everyone is saying Herbert's strength coach isn't paying off, but these injuries aren't as severe as they used to be. Injuries will happen, but Coach Herb is paying off, in my opinion. I mean, that Joe Alt injury, that could have been a lot worse. We're hearing strains, we're hearing sprains, but knock on wood, knock on whatever wood you got around you. Like, so far, he's not wrong. I know it was a laundry list of injuries, but none of them have really been too serious, or at least not many of them. Rem says, Jake, bottom line, stupid pre-snap penalties and horrible blocking on offense. I almost suspect rigging, because how else do you explain the zero offense in the second half? I mean, don't talk to Jake about a conspiracy theory in a good time against the Chiefs.
We could have a really good conversation if we start going down that rabbit hole. That's for sure. Real good conversation. You pour me a glass of bourbon and we'll have a nice conversation.
Herbert is now 0-2 in his last 2 games. The defense gives up 20 points or less after going 18-0 in his first 4 years. That's the upside down world we're in right now. That's what's frustrating. Folks in the chat, we've got maybe 10 minutes or so. We can go some rapid fire questions and topics. If you have thoughts, things you'd like us to discuss, put them in the chat. Let's kind of now look towards the future, Jake. We have kind of the next quarter of football for this Chargers team, next 4 games. What are you, not like what are you hoping to see, but what are you actually expecting to see as they come out of this bye, hopefully a little bit more healthy and having these 2 weeks to kind of self-evaluate?
I mean, you got to think about the position of where the Chargers are going to be at that point in time. You know, the Kansas City Chiefs go up against the New Orleans Saints on Monday Night Football. Denver goes up against the Raiders. Regardless, one way or the other, the Chargers are going to be, in 3rd place by that point in time? For Denver, having to play 2 back-to-back divisional games is a tough spot. But for the Chargers, having to retool after what they have put up offensively over the last 2 weeks, that's a big time thing that I know that they're going to be motivated to fix. You would expect Justin Herbert is going to be healthier with a little bit of extra rest. You would expect that for Joe Alt. It's already encouraging that he's back at practice for the one that they had earlier this week. You hope the best for Rashawn Slater, that we don't really have an update as far as he goes or any expectations for him to come back during next week against Denver. But again, I would hope that they would take a look in the mirror, not just from a standpoint of saying, okay, we got our horses back. Let's go back to our usual game plan. As Greg Roman said, they were going to prepare differently for each opponent that they had on a week-to-week basis. Now, Denver's defense is very, very good. So it's more in the sense of, in this circumstance, of how are you going to adapt? Because you know Denver is going to look to take away one facet of the game or another. Are they going to try to look to take away the pass? Are they going to stack the box against the run and try to take that out? They're going to try to take something away. So how are you going to adapt to that? That's really what I want them to see. And hopefully this bye coming at this point in time gives them the opportunity to do that. On mute, buddy.
Thank you. There was a lot of things happening here at the Denver airport, so I was trying to keep folks from having to hear that.
They probably heard what I was saying, and they probably got pissed off because you're at the Denver
Go
airport.
Broncos! Let's ride. Kimani Vidal and Brendan Rice would be nice to see some decade. Kimani Vidal, sure. I don't know why they're not bringing him on, honestly. I don't understand that one. I hope somebody can answer that.
I'm sure injuries have something to do with that. You're probably keeping extra offensive line active, hoping the worst doesn't happen given the situation. So, but I get it through the first, the first 2 weeks, you didn't need Kimani Vidal.
First 2 weeks I get.
Pittsburgh, maybe a little bit different situation. You probably wanted to see ultimately what the result was going to be, because we all had the confidence, all the confidence in the world after those first 2 weeks of what they could put forth in the running game. And even Jim Harbaugh said, let's see what we're made of.
And that's probably the case for Brendan Rice too. Like, they would like to get him in, but would you rather get Brendan Rice in or maybe someone to help with protection? Or maybe a safety because Durbin's out. Like, it's just unfortunate timing. Let's see. Is the time lost in preseason due to Justin being hurt, rearing his ugly head in the regular season with him not being in sync with the offense?
No, actually, I don't agree with that at all. I think that Justin Herbert, like when he has had time to pass and when he is in a rhythm, again, you go back to that Pittsburgh game, even with the bum ankle, I thought through that first half and how he was delivering the ball and how efficient he was, I thought he looked great. I think everything went to shit when Rashawn Slater went out, then Joe Alt went out, and there was a reason why you put in Taylor Heineke, as Jim Harbaugh said, the first sign that they got of any type of limping that they were pulling him out of that game. In Kansas City, the offensive line situation was even worse. So you couldn't push the ball down the field. And even in the scenarios in which the ball wasn't caught, I bring up that J.K. Dobbins screen pass that Justin Herbert had to improv and still deliver the ball like that. Hell, you can go back to the Ladd McConkey touchdown in the back of the end zone. That's still a ridiculous throw that Justin Herbert put exactly where McConkey could get that. So I feel like that's going to be something that's going to be improved, not only from the standpoint of Justin Herbert being more healthy. You believe that you're going to have your full complement of weapons, but also the big guys up front are going to be able to protect in those type of situations. So when they arise and you want to push the ball down the field on 5 and 7 step drops, you're going to have a much better success rate in doing so.
Hot take, says Laud or LOD. Asante Samuel Jr. won't be back next year.
It's still up in the air right now, if you ask me. Honestly, I wouldn't put it one way or the other. I think you have to see how this situation plays out. If we're going to be objective about this, and you were to say which corner is playing better up until this point,
the bigger question.
You would say Christian Fulton. You would say Christian Fulton right now.
And you look at the guy that just drafted, that just played in his first game.
There's still a lot of football to go, so we'll see.
Yeah, they got targets still. Brian, Jake, do you intend to have drinking games planned for the next draft party, and will Dan partake? Okay, so first off, we have videos that might have to show their ugly head here at some point from draft parties. I'll just leave it at that. But, Jake, this is your question. This is your draft party. I'll let you answer it.
First of all, this is appropriate. It's almost like, first of all, this is a rhetorical question. Yes. Given the fact that it's being asked by someone who partook in those drinking games is also classic.
And as if I did not partake? What the hell is that?
Well, you partook in like the first few picks of the second round.
No.
You didn't go all the second and the third round throughout all that. I believe.
You're right. I did not do.
You had some mulligans in there, and you passed away some drinks to other people. Like, hey, you take my shot and everything like this. Yeah. So, I think you should, arrange your schedule and driving situations accordingly.
I did not partake.
You did not partake. You just didn't partake as long as everybody else did.
Okay, sorry.
You still had fun though.
Boy, was I laughing until I was crying multiple times. Let's see. Brian also asked, Hassan is a better special teamer is what I'm thinking. Vidal will sit until there's an injury, perhaps. That'll be interesting once Nick Neiman comes back. What happens with Hassan Askins?
Don't know.
Am I missing anything?
He's back at practice, so I believe that 21-day window is officially open for him. So depending on how soon he's going to come back, it's not necessarily as of right now a guarantee that he comes back for the Denver game. Would it be nice to have him? Absolutely. You see how valuable he is on special teams. And if they start utilizing the way they did in the preseason, hey, I'm all for that as well.
REM says, I think the Chargers might have blown it, not picking Neighbors.
Dan, this is all you do. First of all, hang on. Before Dan goes off on this, hindsight is 2020 when you look at things. First of all, Malik Neighbors is an unbelievable player and is off to a fantastic start.
Who told you that?
Well, the results of the first 4 weeks, but you also were telling me that. However, let's stop this idea of Chargers blowing it by taking Joe Alt instead of Malik Neighbors. No, because if the Chargers passed on Joe Alt, just think about this for a second. If you took Malik Neighbors, would he be a fantastic weapon? Yes. But the same offensive line problems that the Chargers would have been having over the last several years would also still be taking place. In terms of who's going to get the ball down there in that period of time, I don't think that you would have that if you didn't have Joe Alt. And when you look at the way that draft played out, for where the Chargers took Joe Alt and the corresponding offensive linemen that were taken just in the first round alone, If you flip-flop that and you went receiver and then you went to address the offensive line in the second round, you wouldn't be getting the same type of production that you're getting from Joe Alt now.
And honestly, look at Malik Neighbors' numbers, and I was captain of that train. I was full on Malik Neighbors, wide receiver 1. And you look at his production with say what you will about Daniel Jones, whatever, that those production numbers are nothing like that in this Chargers offense, the Greg Roman and Jim Harbaugh. Now, still star-studded talent, absolutely. And I'm a huge Malik Neighbors fan. I would have been so happy, but you can't say the Joe Alt selection was wrong. You just can't. Joe Alt is unreal as a tackle, and you have a tackle at that price for 5 years. You take that. Let's see. James has got to go. We've got to go here soon, too. Got to go. You guys are a legendary team. A blast and always the best. Bolts up you all. God bless everyone. Anything else, Jake? We went through a lot here. I kind of want to get lay of the land. Any other kind of things that you expect to see as we kind of go into this second quarter of the season?
Again, Dan, I feel like we would have had more questions if this wasn't a Jim Harbaugh-led team. The things that you see that are going wrong outside of the injuries are very, very minimal.
I think we have the same. You have similar questions, but more concerns.
I don't even necessarily. Yes, if it wasn't Jim Harbaugh, yes, I would have more concerns because I could tell from a much bigger sample size that it would be the same old rhetoric, the same old issues of what the Chargers are going through. Now, while you still have some offensive line issues, if we're just talking about depth and it's not the starting 5, yeah, I get that that's familiar. But everything else, in terms of defensively, when the Chargers are at full strength and how they're able to dictate the pace, sure, they've already shown that they are capable of doing so. But just like I was mentioning earlier in the show, you take away two talents like that in Rashawn Slater and Joe Alt, and that changes everything, whether it's in the run or the pass game. You get back to doing that, and you come up with a more revised game plan of how you're going to be able to not only move the ball, but put points on the board, specifically in the second half. You can do that. You're 2-2 right now. You've got the bye week to figure this out. You've got a tough stretch of what you need to do, 3 of these next 4 weeks being on the road. But I think that they're going to be ready to play, and you're going to see some improvements in a variety of different factors.
A couple more for you, and we'll head out of here. Acquiring a proven receiver before the trade deadline. That is something that is expected by REM. Jake, do you see it? I know there's talks about stuff happening in Carolina. You got Devontae Adams stuff. There's a whole bunch of receivers that could be available.
Does anybody not, I mean, look, not to say that it's a foregone conclusion that would happen, a trade for any player, but does anybody to this point right now have less confidence that it's not going to happen with Joe Hortiz as opposed to when it was Tom Telesco? Because I have all the confidence in the world that something is going to happen. I give it a much better chance of something happening. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's going to be a receiver. I don't know if it's going to be a player or for a pick or whatever it's going to be. But I have so much more confidence in something being done.
Agreed. Robert says, hang in there, Darth Dan. I guess
that's what we're going to call you from now on. You've gone over to the dark side. That's what we're going to call you from now on.
Jay Rachel says, I am on the alt wagon. He's a lineman we needed. I mean, I agree. It's hard. It's hard to argue that pick. But we said it. This Chargers team, it wasn't going to fix everything in one season, but they fixed a hell of a lot. And so there's a lot of football left. And I think sometimes during the bye week, it's a good time to kind of have that self-reflection. And I know as sure as hell that this Chargers coaching staff, the behemoth it is going through that. And I do expect them to respond in this coming game against the Broncos. Sorry, Broncos fans. But realistically, it's still way early, and there's still a whole lot coming. But overall, you can't help but be optimistic about the future. There was something that earlier, Jake, about my biggest fear is that Jesse Minter leaves before the Chargers team wins Super Bowl, which I can go off on that tangent too. So please don't waste a good defense for Justin Herbert. That's all I'm asking. Please, Please don't do that. Jake, anything else? I know we went a little long today. It's been a while, so I kind of wanted to give folks a little bit more time. I apologize again for the delay in us coming out here. It's been a tough week. Unfortunate circumstances happening on my end. Also, obviously, on Jake's end too for different reasons. But anything else, Jake?
Now, let's get back to football. First of all, we have nothing to worry about this week. Enjoy, relax.
Don't you say that. Don't
watch
you say
some
that.
red zone.
You better take that back.
What did I say? The Chargers aren't playing.
Yes, but things happen when people are playing. Things happen in practice. I don't even want to put that on us.
Okay, look, you will not have a stressful fourth quarter to watch on Sunday. How about that?
You won't have a penalty to be upset about.
If that is better to your delicate sensibilities right now, there you go. So enjoy it. Watch some red zone. Enjoy everybody, and everybody enjoy your weekend. And we'll look forward to Denver.
Yes, we'll be doing more, obviously, the Denver preview episode next week as we get to week 6, which will be wild. I think we're already there. But until then, this is Chargers Unleashed. For Jake Hefner, you can find him at Jake D. Hefner, myself at Dan W. Sports. Thank you all so much for tuning in, for all the support throughout. Hit that like and subscribe. Helps us out a ton. You can find us everywhere you get your podcast. But until then, we'll talk to you next time on Chargers Unleashed.